Is Mount Shasta a stargate? What lies beneath? Let's find out on this Sunday Night Live.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to FOJC Radio Sunday Night Live. We are so thankful for each and every one of you joining us for the broadcast this evening, which is entitled Mount Shasta Stargate. And I am so honored that Brian Reese is joining me. Brian, I like this one. This is right in our wheelhouse.
Absolutely, David. Glad to be here on the Sunday Night Live. Mount Shasta, Stargate. Stargates is up my alley. Ley lines, all that good stuff, and megalithic structures. And let's jump into this one tonight. This Sunday Night Live, let's ride this one thing out tonight on the Sunday night. And glad for everybody to be here in the chat. Welcome everybody to the Sunday Night Live program, Mount Shasta, here Stargate. So, David, I'll give the floor back to you, brother.
And what is a Stargate? And a Stargate is a name that is used by pop culture, the ancient alien community, the New Age slash UFO people. But actually, what they mean by a Stargate is spoken of biblically. There are doors and there are portals and there are gates. Jesus spoke of the gates of hell, and there are many others we've talked about on a lot of broadcasts. And spirits are able to dwell in realms that flesh and blood humans cannot. We're not talking about a Stargate that's going to go to Alpha Centauri, many light years away and all of that. But there are realms. There are realms in the heart of the earth where spirits dwell. There are realms in the second and the third heaven where spirits dwell. And there are realms beyond the ice wall where spirits can dwell. And these gates open up the ability for spirits and many times human beings and animals to move from one place to another. And we've put the scriptures to this many times, the 12 gates of hell, the Jonah chapter 2 and verse 6, the bars there at the heart of the earth that literally go from the depths of the oceans into the heart of the earth, the gates in the book of Enoch. We've really laid the foundation for this many times here on Sunday Night Live and the Midnight Ride. And we're going to be examining the evidence. Is Mount Shasta a Stargate? And we're going to be looking at a lot of the mysterious things that happen there. And if the explanation of it being a Stargate or a portal into another realm would answer some of the questions. Well, I want to begin with a very interesting account that's recorded in this book, Stargates by Betsy Lewis. And on page 27, she talks about an incident that took place on Mount Shasta, September 2nd, 2011. She wrote, the bizarre incident began on Friday night, September 2nd, 2011, the day a 3-year-old boy vanished around 7:35 p.m. near the Mount Shasta area in Northern California. His parents had set up camp near a large creek when Indiana Pitts wandered away from camp. The parents began to frantically search for him and their son before contacting the local sheriff and the United States Forest Service. The McLeod Volunteer Fire Department was first on the scene, and within 45 minutes, an estimated 100 paid and unpaid searchers and rescue personnel were combing through the forested area. In most missing cases, the people or children who go missing are never found or are found dead. Approximately 5 hours after Indiana went missing, he was found alive in a thicket directly next to a trail the rescue teams had thoroughly searched. Now, what's also very compelling in this story, it is one, and there's so many of these in 2018 alone. 18 people vanished mysteriously without a trace from Mount Shasta. 18 in 1 year. I mean, really. I mean, that should have really been a very newsworthy story. 18 people vanished without a trace in 1 year, 2018. And I'll go along and read here what this young boy said about his experience. It says, the little boy said, "Don't you remember when I was lost in the woods? The other Grandma Cappy grabbed me and took me to a creepy place. She's really a robot," he continued. "It was a cave with spiders, and there was purses and guns. I was too scared, so I didn't touch anything. But when she climbed the ladder, the light made her look like a robot. There were other robots too, but they didn't move. She made me lay down to look at my tummy. Then she tried to get me to poop on a sticky paper." Now, what do we got going on here, Brian? What say you? We got a little boy disappears there on Mount Shasta. He reappears and tells a story about a robot that looked just like his grandmother that had taken him to a very strange place. What do you think's going on here?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, David, because we're looking at literally some type of time. There's a time manipulation kind of narrative going on here, and then the little boy's account talking about an android that looks very similar to a family member. Well, it's interesting that this is a topic here that happened in what, 2018? Is that the date, Brother David? 2018?
In 2018, there were 18 people
18
disappeared.
people.
And this specific instance took place in 2011.
2011. Forgive me.
Yeah.
2011, though, even though this is, what, 15 years ago pretty much now, one thing I will have to point out, in 2024, here we are, and Tucker Carlson just recently had a guest on, and he's talking about this. He's talking about there's these android-like creature beings that they're like avatars, and they're manipulating, and they'll take on the form of family members, friends, just to kind of help make everything comfortable, but it goes into this UFO phenomenon. But one thing that I'll point out, if this account from this little boy in 2011, he's talking about this creepy place in the woods, David, I wonder, in this account, if there was any nuclear facilities close by. What do you say about that? Because I'll kind of go where I think, there's a video, there's a new series that's on Netflix. It came out in 2019. I watched one season. It's really dark. Literally, the show's called Dark, but it's got a lot of nasty stuff in it, whatnot. But there's a nuclear facility. There's this wood narrative. People going missing. It's very demonic. But my point is, getting back to 2011, this little boy reappearing, disappearing, and then talking about his family member. There's some manipulation going on, and I think we got some cloning. We got some, either the powers that be. We have the fallen angel narrative, and they're taking on the forms of androids. Wonder what happened to the family member. Wonder what happened, David.
Well, I guess the real grandmother never left or went anywhere. And to me, it doesn't look like time manipulation, but space manipulation, where some thing took this little boy from where he was, took him somewhere else, and then brought him back. And this idea of a double, some kind of a machine like double that was imitating grandma. Now, in satanic ritual abuse, it's very common for masks to be made. They will make a mask that will represent the children's parents. And this is a common technique used in satanic ritual abuse. And this idea of duplication and cloning, and even here, according to this little boy, some kind of robotic device. This is a concept that runs very, very deep within the dark world when we get into this. And of course, this is going to open up doors for us to talk about these things like cloning. Um, and twinning and a lot of these concepts. But this is a very, very compelling story. And if this was just the story of one little 3-year-old child, it would be what it would be. But there are many other stories similar to this that we're going to be exploring of adults, grown up, college educated adults, and other things that are repeatedly telling these very strange things. And as always, we're going to try to look to scripture to get an understanding of just what's going on in this dark world.
And it reminds me one other thing too to mention: the Men in Black, the whole Men in Black concept. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
seeing it was a rancher, but two ranchers, I think, seeing this was like in the late 1800s. There was an account where there was two men in black on a horse and buggy, but for some reason there was a malfunction, or one of them fell off and looked back, and the ranger or the ranchers was sitting out there in their field, looked and seen this man fall off, and when they went up to the so-called man, they rolled up to it and they described like cogs, like gears. They,
Mm-hmm.
for the 1800s, they didn't. It was like, wow, what is this? This is some type of. There's no blood. This is an android.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that
Mm-hmm.
1800. That's late 1800s. So here we are talking about an account for 2011. What's going on, David? We have, I hear all this stuff going on with the UFO, the UAP narrative, and I hear the complexity of all of it. That they say there's these avatars, the gray aliens are using avatar bodies to communicate with humans, and to make them comfortable and all this stuff into the abductions and the abductees. I wonder if this is something similar to what this 2011 narrative is with the child and all this manipulation. And we could either, like you said, time space or space time or interdimensional. There could have been any kind of stargate portals open or something that really, and it messed up the young man's ability to kind of keep his bearings. So he really couldn't comprehend what he was trying to articulate. And then he's not going to lie about it because he's such a young age, and he's thinking, man, there's an android body looks like my grandmother. It's a bizarre world, David, but I'll give the floor back to you.
Well, and one of the possibilities here, and a very real one, we're now seeing AI beginning to think and become sentient on its own. And what one of the possibilities is here, and I think quite likely, is that there are machines being created that we could call an android that are being possessed by spirits. They are re engineering human bodies and machines and mixing the two together to be able to create an entity that spirits can possess and live in. And just who those spirits are, we're going to put forth some ideas for you. Now, in Madame Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, one of the biggest traditions about Mount Shasta is the legend of Lemuria. And in the cult lore, Lemuria, in Madame Blavatsky, it was the third great race and the third great continent right before Atlantis. And this is the tradition that underneath Mount Shasta here, there are the underground complexes and the remains of the Lemurian civilization, which is much like Atlantis was destroyed in a cataclysm. But I'll read a little bit about what Mrs. Blavatsky wrote. And this is on page 195 of volume 2 of her Secret Doctrine. And she said, for there are, or rather still were, a few years ago, descendants of these half animal tribes or races, both of remote Lemurian and Lemurian Atlantean origin. And she talks about this race. It says they are semi human, if not quite an animal race, the hybrids resulting, which union not only bred freely, but produced the ancestors of the modern anthropoid apes. She goes on to return, however, once more to the history of the third race, referring to the Lemurians, the sweat born, the egg bearing, and the androgyne almost sexless in its early beginnings, it became bisexual or androgynous, very gradually, of course. The passage from the former to the latter transformation required numberless generations, during which the simple cell that issued from the earliest parent, the two in one, first developed into a bisexual being. Then we got here the whole bisexual narrative. But what we see here in and this is just that, it's an occult tradition, but I think what we could have here, how do we understand this biblically? We see here an area with the tradition that underground, that there was created a race that was half animal, it was half human, and it says here, and they began being from androgyny, and the whole androgynous thing plays in here. But what we could be looking at, and of course in this area, it's Bigfoot crazy. There are so many sightings of Bigfoot and Sasquatch around Mount Shasta. I don't think you would find anywhere that would have any more. But what this occult tradition could be reflecting is the antediluvian period, where we read in the book of Jasher that fallen angels taught human beings how to manipulate the animal genome. We know from Genesis 6 that the fallen angels inbred with human women to produce the Nephilim. But I think what we're seeing here is the origin of Bigfoot right here. And we can read in the book of Jasher, in the book of Jasher, this is chapter 4, verse 17. And every man made himself unto himself a god, and they robbed and plundered every man his neighbor as well as his relative, and they corrupted the earth, and the earth was filled with violence. And their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth. Cattle mutilations. Cattle mutilations right here. We have the origin of cattle mutilations right here in the book of Jasher. That's another subject that's worthy of a real in-depth look. But right here, the book of Jasher is telling us that they were messing with the cattle. They took from the cattle of the earth, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, and it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth, all men and all animals. And I think this very time period and in this very place, we had going on the manipulation of the animal genome, the mixing up with the human. And I think right here we have the origin and the understanding of just what Bigfoot is. I think this is what produced Bigfoot right here.
It's interesting too, David, because it's literally just turned the gears of my mind here, and I'm reflecting back on a conversation I remember in 2017. And in 2017, I remember, I think it was in Germany, they successfully made a cell that could replicate. And it had there's a certain terms we can't say on here, but it could replicate, and it almost reminded you of like a Tron kind of narrative. There was a flesh aspect, but there was a robot aspect. So it would literally. So is that what we was referring to earlier? Is it replicating? Do we have, because the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun? Is there something there with fallen angel knowledge, back to the account with the young man and his grandmother, 2011? Is there something going on there that we had an android that could actually replicate? And they've been saying it in the movies. You remember Terminator? I think it was a T-1000. He could look at somebody and he could literally mimic it and make a doppelganger. I mean, it's been leaked small little amounts in the movies, and that was in the 80s when that movie came out. I think 80s or early 90s with the T-1000. It makes you wonder, David, and could that be what the whole Enoch, the whole manipulation, could that be something with the 2017, would the claims of Germany and researchers and scientists claiming that they was able to successfully do that? I don't know. What do you say, David?
Well, we have the Transformers, and these things, and a lot of these we can scarcely talk about on the air would be knocked off in a nanosecond. But our audience is very intelligent. They know what we're talking about. And the ability of machines even to reproduce themselves or create other machines, this is certainly not beyond the realm of possibility. And I think indeed it's already happening. And certainly the idea that a machine could be created that could be inhabited by a spirit that could actually go from one realm to another. And we've talked about, and I think that's what we've got. We've got some kind, in the case of the little Indiana Jones boy, my best guess, we have some kind of a machine that was possessed by a spirit. And I believe, these are obviously the spirits of the Nephilim that was in this machine. And somehow they had the ability to be able to go from the realm here where flesh and blood dwells here on the first heaven to another place and to go to these other realms where spirits dwell. And I might throw in Enoch 44, there's even the ability of some of these entities to dwell within electricity and within vibrations. So there literally can be in vibrations, can be in electrical charges. And these are all of the biblical possibilities and scientific of what we've got going on here. But these stories are so consistent. And I mean, come on, 18 people in 1 year, what's going on? If 18 people would disappear in 1 year from Richmond, Kentucky without a trace, someone would, I think someone would start trying to figure out what was going on.
Right.
And we've got an amazing phenomena here that's reoccurring. And I think that we can find the biblical understanding that what the New Age ancient alien crowd would call a stargate is exactly what we got going on here.
Well, David, one thing I have to ask. The first thing that comes to my mind is Stoichion spirits, and then also like metallurgy. Like when you go back and look into Emerald Tablets, Thoth, and these fallen angel narratives, going way back to the pre-Adamite world. There's a lot of archaeology evidence where you'll see metal embedded into some of the skulls, and there's these weird
Yeah.
anomalies. What do you think,
Yeah.
Dave? Do you think they're doing something with there's the evidence of technological advancements, so-called technological advancements way back in the day. So it wouldn't be too hard to do it in 2024. What do you think, David?
Well, it might be kind of like Frankenstein with the bolts on the side of his neck.
Yeah.
So, it's possible. We can definitely say that it's definitely possible. And, there has been no explanation giving where all these people are going. So, we're putting forth ideas. We're analyzing the spiritual flavor of Mount Shasta and all these things. And of course, as always, we'll look at the scripture and see what we can come up with. All right. In this next slide here, it is a book entitled The Sasquatch Message to Humanity. And this is written by a guy by the name of Sunbow. And Sunbow is a channeler. And what a channeler is someone, and what they're actually doing, they're opening themselves up for spirits to speak through them. And Mr. Sunbow opens himself up for a Bigfoot to speak through him, and a Sasquatch, as he called him, called Elder Camus. And Elder Camus of the Sasquatch, they speak through Mr. Sunbow here. And we're going to look at what he has to say here. And it is, again, very compelling. This is what, now here we go. I mean, then this is total wackadoodle. But you see, what we have here, these are spirits that are speaking. And these spirits are, we're literally talking about devils speaking through individuals. But it's important to hear the demonic spin to be able to figure out what's really going on. And a lot of times they say too much. And another fella, David Pilates. David Pilates in the 411 Missing series. Mr. Pilates has drawing attention that it's not just Mount Shasta, that there are many, many other places where these disappearances have been happening. Many of them in the national parks and many, many places, a lot of them. So this is something that he's trying to draw attention to. And I say, very good for you, Mr. Pilates. Now, this is the message from Elder Hamu. He says, me and your people used to be close brothers, meaning the humans and the Sasquatches, living side by side in the early ages of the human species, when you could still sit in the council of the star elders. We were your elder brothers, protecting and teaching you. We helped your species to grow, learn, and adapt to this home planet where you were created, on which we had been living since long before your conception. Our people, like yours, were bioengineered by the star elders. Now, whenever you take these demonic messages, and we've been talking a lot about the alien psyop on the Midnight Ride. Brian and I were going to do an entire Midnight Ride on the alien psyop. And they were in, and whenever you see the star elders, if you just insert fallen angels / Nephilim, you've got the true story. I do not doubt that this took place. And of course, human beings were not created by ET. That's a lie. God created human beings. But the genetic manipulation by Satan through Genesis 6 and Jasher chapter 4 into the human genome, it's a reality. And this, I believe, took place right here at Mount Shasta in these realms where there was genetic engineering that created these entities that people are still seeing, called the Sasquatch and the Bigfoot. And it goes on to say, Elder Camus continued, my people were created as a part of a cosmic plan to allow ancient souls of star beings to incarnate on this young planet and help it evolve into an intergalactic outpost of consciousness. So according to this guy that's channeling this devil called Camus, that these creatures called Bigfoot were genetically engineered so that spirits could dwell within them. Now, that's a very spiritual possibility, and we're going to look at the very passage here in the book of Enoch to help us understand what we got going on here. But what do you think about that, Brian?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, I remember an account with military personnel, and they're talking about this find, and it was a family, and one of them was a teenager, and there was a mom and a father, and but they was hairy. Like, literally, they claimed it looked like Bigfoot. And they put them in a Apache helicopter. They're sitting there having conversations, and supposedly these beings have a higher intellect, and they could even, like, telepathically and everything. There was all these reports that they could speak into their heads and read their minds, and they didn't know, they was scared. They didn't know what to do. They wanted to take care of their child. They just wanted to be relocated, but they stumbled upon this family in the woods. I can't remember the account where the area was, but there has been reports of that. Also, there's been reports of these Sasquatch Bigfoots that seem to be going after women, and it kind of reminds you of Genesis 6, in my opinion. The fallen, the sons of God made with the daughters of men, and they took wives as they chose. It almost reminds me, it's very eerie and similarities with that you hear. That I've heard accounts, David, that there'll be a grandmother, and then the daughter of the that woman, and then there'd be 3 generations, and the grandmother would have a child, and then vice versa. It would be the great grandbaby. The grandbaby would be subjected to these hairy like creatures coming up on their porches, and what's so crazy about it, they would be in these areas, mountain ranges, or in these wooded areas, and there would be people being basically they would say, "Look, here, there's the evidence of the the camera footage. There's like these two eyes, and there's this big body, large man sitting there looking at my window, watching my daughter, or trying to come in. You can hear him running up on top of the roof, and there's all these accounts." So, from what this gentleman is saying here, it reminds me there's a spiritual application, absolutely, but then there's a physical aspect of it that these things are coming and going, because these counts can't just be like, some people saying, well, I've captured Bigfoot. I have the physical evidence, but you never see the proof. Or you'll see an authentic video that was done back in, the 70s, that we never even had iPhones back then, all this advanced technology we have. It's kind of interesting that they'll have those, and then you'll have these clips of these hairy creatures running upon these mountains. And to me, David, I would say, like the account from 2018, 18 people missing, I have looked into this. I have looked in Colorado events, and there's military bases not too far in circumference in these areas where people go missing, and a lot of them are national parks, etc. And I've always said, even on all the programs I've ever done, I've looked at it and I'm thinking, okay, so why do you have all this advanced military? There's a tourist attraction. It's an incentive to go camping. It's an incentive to do this. There's these lakes. You go fishing. But then you have, like we was talking about at the beginning of the program, 2018, there's 18 people missing. And then Mr. Pilates there talking about all over these locations. There's missing for one that he does movies and stuff on and documentaries. It's very compelling, David. But the information always leads back. It seems like there's this German ties. Like there's German, the Germany concept with the pre-programming, matter. And then there's this aspect of what Mr. Pilates has come up with. He's come up with that all the evidence of these people going missing, there's a German connection. And that ties back to the German Bale and everything to do with Adolf Hitler and all the technological advancements. What is that, David? What's going on here? What do you say, David?
Well, we've been talking, and we'll talk on the next Midnight Ride that you and I do, that from Philip Corso and people like him that were involved in Operation Paperclip, that the book The Day After Roswell, this began the narrative that the United States government is back engineering alien craft. And here again, there's a basis of truth to this, but what they are back engineering is not alien craft, but the continued development of the sophisticated weaponry that the Germans were developing. And I believe they're continuing this in Antarctica in coordination with the German and American scientists and their successors that came out through Paperclip. And I think it's exactly what we're looking at here.
There's excuse me, David, I apologize, but there's all these, it's always connection with younger children. I've noticed there's younger children going missing, and they'll always say there's this hairy bear or something like that. There's this, compiling data where there's these big bears coming and terrorizing the children. And I remember there was a gentleman that, God bless his family, he passed away. But there was a man that did a really good job at Bigfoot and analyzing that analysis and blood, forensics and all that he did with all the Bigfoot, that he dedicated his whole life to that. And I remember him telling a story that a child went missing and supposedly there was a Bigfoot connection, and that child was gone for a long time and grew hair, David, like long hair all over its body. And there was something going on there spiritually where the hair follicles would grow like supercharged. And I think he went missing like young years. I can't remember if it's 4 or 5. And then they've ended up finding him like 12 or 13. And he was like fully in, like had hair all over his body. What do you say about that, David? Is there some kind of spiritual application where it's like you stay around these beings, and once you mingle with them, or if you have to be forced to be taken by them, do you start picking up, I guess would they use the term DNA or something? What do you say, David? We got to watch what we say, but what do you think?
Well, these entities are taking people from one place to another, and they're experimenting on them. And these experiments, as from countless of the most voluminous testimonies, there's many from SRA and there's many from the UFO abductions, which are intricately connected, by the way. And even like in the Mothman episode, there's always the intense, and Mothman is just another one of these Bigfoot creatures that I believe resulted from this time period in the antediluvian period and have continued to dwell in the heart of the earth. It's always around caves where you see these things. And there were some women, there was about, I don't know, 4 or 5 women that had been pursued by Mothman back during the appearance there in Mount Pleasant, West Virginia, when he was appearing there so intensely for a period of time. And when these women got together to do an interview with whoever was interviewing them, they got to talking, and all of these ladies, it was that time of the month for them when they were being pursued by Mothman. There's this intense interest in human sexuality, reproduction, and all of these things is one of the common threads that we have running. Now let's ask her this question. Now, why? If they are genetically engineering bodies for spirits to dwell in, just what spirits are we talking about? And we can find out definitively from the book of Enoch, chapter 15, verse 8. And now the giants who are produced from the spirits and flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. Evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies because they are born from men, and from the holy watchers is their beginning and primal origin. Genesis 6. And they shall be spirits on the earth, and evil spirits shall they be called. As for the spirits of heaven, in heaven shall be their dwelling, but for the spirits of the earth, which were born upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. And the spirits of the giants afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth, and cause trouble. They take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst, and cause offenses. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of men and against the women, because they have proceeded from them. And we know from Genesis 6, fallen angels mated with human women and produced what is called the Nephilim and Rephaim in Scripture. Now, when these entities died, you had basically a half human, half fallen angel creature. They were able to reproduce among themselves, and they were, when they died, there is no resurrection. Isaiah 26 tells us the dead rise not. And they are what we see talked about in the New Testament as devils that are there as disembodied spirits. Now, here's the problem. When they die, they become a disembodied spirit, and they certainly do a lot to afflict mankind. But if that spirit could be put back into a body, that would give them more power. So this is what these Nephilim did before the flood. Right in the 4th chapter of the book of Jasher, they began manipulating and creating these monstrosities from the animal kingdom with the hopes, and I think they're getting there, to where they can actually, and I think Bigfoot, Mothman, these are genetically engineered creatures that the spirits of the Nephilim can dwell in. And of course, the Nephilim story, well, we were created by the star people and genetically engineered for the souls of them to go in. And in reality, they were created to inhabit the souls of the Nephilim. That's exactly, I believe, what we're looking at here.
David, it reminds me of Fee Fi Fo Fum, I Smell the Blood of an Englishman. I wonder where that came from. Are they able to,
Yeah.
they're hunting, what I mean? They're predators, right?
Yeah.
They're seeking the
Animals.
blood. They're seeking the blood, right? And that's,
Yeah.
reminded me of when you was talking about the women.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
that's pretty compelling. That's something to document.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary when you think about it like that,
Well,
but that's just the way it is. That's the Genesis 6 narrative.
and forgive me for being graphic. We'll try to talk about it just as PG as we can, but we've talked a lot of times on Midnight Rides about the Starfire. And this was literally a false communion that has been partaken of by bloodline families, according to Lawrence Gardner, from several thousand years BC. They actually use of who they believe is the Anunnaki queen, and they believe that her blood is the most pure uh, for them to have, to give them this demonic bloodline charge, and that's literally what they do. And these things, the most vile, this came out in the spirit cooking when this came out not long ago, of all the things, the disgusting things that they were putting into food and eating it. It is just satanic and it's evil. And this is Crowleyan Satanism. Crowley would do all kinds of unspeakable things. And it all goes back. This is the worship, this is the religion of the giants. And it's the Nephilim fallen religion. And it's ugly and it's vile. And this is what's behind all of these bizarre Dr. Frankenstein things that we see going on. And we're seeing an explosion of it in our day and time, and you all are all aware of it. It's the crazy things are happening so rapidly, it's hard to keep up with. But in the book of Jubilees, chapter 10, verse 9, it says something very compelling that I believe. And it speaks of the time of Noah's grandchildren when they were getting pounded by the spirits of these giants. And Noah prayed for his grandchildren, and the Lord answered his prayer by banning 90% of them to the underworld. In Jubilees 10:9, and he said, let the 10th part of them remain before him, and let 9 parts descend into the place of condemnation. And literally what we're having these spirits of the Nephilim. That's what Camus is. Old Sunbow and Elder Camus, he is nothing but a Nephilim that is teaching this doctrine for people to believe. And it's a psyop. Just like the alien psyop, it turns people away from the understanding of it all with the Word of God and the Genesis 6 scenario. Well, Philip Corso says, well, it's alien craft. And, Elder Camus says, it's the star people. No, it's Genesis 6. That's what it is. And it's all right there in the Bible. And it's coming to a culmination. And what Mr. Camus and Sunbow are doing in 1 Timothy 4:1, now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. And in that scripture in 1 Timothy, it tells us that many people that once were true believers are going to fall into following this, and not only fall into following it, but are actually going to be channeling devils teaching their doctrine. And I think you can see this garbage on TV all the time. And what it's building up to, it's building up to what we call in the Bible the remover of the restrainer. In Revelation 9, we see the pit opened and little critters coming out, and a bunch of them. And these are the 90%. The book of Jubilees speaks of the 90% going down and being restrained in the underworld, where here they come. Revelation 9, and the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of the great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And when these entities are released, there are people that are working, and I think many of them knowingly so, that are preparing genetically altered human beings, genetically modified animals, machines that are all created to house the spirits that are going to be released when the removal of the restrainer and the opening of the abyss takes place. And that, my friends, you're going to want to make sure you have the seal of God on your forehead, because if you don't, these little critters are going to have you. And it goes on to say that people are going to actually pray to die, and they're not going to be able to die. They'll seek death during this time, and they'll not be able to find it.
Well, David, it reminds me of the transhumanism phase with the new age
Yeah.
of man, you know? So it looks,
Yeah.
this verses remind me of that, how that's going to creep on us pretty quick. It seems like that's speeding at high velocity speed. You know what I mean? It's coming up pretty quick here in 2025. I mean, my goodness, look how much advancements. But it's starting to really, with this presentation and these with this Revelation 9:14, it's starting to really come to life. And I think people should really prepare their hearts, you know, really, and read their word and really get into it and start walking this thing out with Christ. You know what I mean? It's coming to
Yes, sir.
it's coming to the
Yeah.
threshold, you know.
Yeah. And that's what we say, get ready. Now, the rapture people, they're saying, don't worry, you'll be raptured out before the great tribulation. The preterists, they say, don't worry, there won't be a great tribulation. So, you know, these are twin bookhead doctrines, both from the Jesuits, that are telling God's people not to prepare physically or spiritually for what's coming. And that is both directly out of the pit of hell. And it's easy to see the spiritual affinity of those two Jesuit lies. Now, let's take it a little deeper, as if we're not in deep enough already. But I want to go back and read another little part here from Betsy Lewis's book on stargates, and this is on page 35. And she refers to a book by Artie Clark, Encounters with Star People, where she interviews a number of these people that had experiences like that. And I want to read a little bit about a Navajo Indian man in his mid-40s by the name of Willie. And Willie Joe was his name. And a little bit about what he told Dr. Clark. And it says here, Willie Joe began, "My life has never been my own. From the time I was born, I had a twin. Not in the sense of a biological twin, but a twin created by aliens from my blood and nurtured by them on some far distant planet." And whenever you hear this psyop, if you just replace the aliens with the Nephilim and the people the Nephilim are working with right here on the earth, you got a pretty accurate scenario that of what is going on. And he goes on to say, uh, she writes about Willie Joe. It says, Willie Joe knew that his duplicate did not have a soul like human beings, but he believed that this duplicate of himself was inhabited by something else that was not a human soul. And he goes on, she writes, let's pray that Willie Joe was wrong about the soulless clones placed on our planet mixing with humans for some unknown purpose. In the past few years, the anger, hate, and draconian agenda being pushed on Americans has escalated and might be an indication that millions of soulless humans are here to take over our country. Now, this brings us to the concept of cloning and the actual creation of clones and duplicate human beings from the time someone is born. Now, Brian, what do you make about this? And go ahead and take us into this next slide and talk about something that's extremely controversial. It's but you know, we're not afraid of controversy. So Brian, just go ahead and take us down this road.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the biblical narrative when the Almighty breathed in Adam's nostrils a living soul, and that really resonates with me when we're talking about these soulless beings, android-like robots, clones. And the next thing that comes to my mind is you got NASA. So NASA, we've talked about this on many programs, but when we talked about it in the JFK assassination or video we did, that one really hit home for me. And then also the Back to the Future. Here we are talking about movies and how much they subliminally message in you with predictive programming. And we look at the whole twin narrative, the doppelganger. And, it's interesting what you're reading out of the Stargate book. It kind of goes along with when you always hear, haven't I seen you before? Don't you have a twin? And then there's the word doppelganger, where everybody, it seems like it's kind of a, more of a hip name now. Everybody's like, don't you have a duplicate? Did you ever have a twin? And it kind of seems strange to me that that's the world we live in. But on the screen here, we have the NASA narrative in 1986. This crew on the Challenger of STS-51 supposedly died in this shuttle explosion in 1986. But it turns out 6 out of 7 are still alive and kicking today. And when we go down this narrative, just recently, Brother David, there was a man, I think he went to Congress or some kind of senator setting, and he was like, I kind of laughed about it because I was like, well, it's about time somebody's, coming to it. And he took it. He's like, how are these people teaching and having these degrees and teaching at Harvard and all these different things? They're teaching and they're under the same exact name of these people that supposedly died in 1986. How do you even go there? And the man's like speaking like very fluently, and their people are like, just in shock that there's a man saying, check this evidence out. What do we got going on here? Why is this? Why we have twins? Why are they saying they have a twin? How do they all have twins? And then all of a sudden, they just miraculously show up in these teaching, seminars and different things, these different applications with these people. And to me, it goes back to what we referred to in the JFK program, where there was many Oswalds. There's always this connection, but there's many of this. And did you know, David, that there actually is a NASA program that is called Twins, and they look into resonating how they communicate with each other. They want to look into telekinesis, if they like blue, if they both like the same color, etc., if they like the same foods, and they're collecting this data. And it reminds me, Brother David, of our, when we talked about it in other broadcasts we've done here on FLJC, when Hitler was really infatuated with twins. The Argentina narrative and the blue-eyed, blonde-haired Aryan race. There's something here going on. And then when you look at the NASA, to this day, they have twins that are supposedly going back and forth. And I forgot the two gentlemen that are, I think one of them still active. But it's just interesting that this still goes on to this day. And what do you say, Brother David? Because this cannot be a coincidence. And I think there's some nefariousness going on here. Do we have androids? Do we have a clone? What say you, David?
Well, I cannot definitively say, but I can say that one possibility, and as good as any I could come up with, and it is, what is up with that? These people that supposedly died, well, they're teaching college under the very same name, and it's either the same person or a twin or some kind of a clone thing going on. So possibly what Willie Joe, the Navajo Indian, said, that as wild as it might seem, this man claimed that from the time he was born, there was a bioengineered clone produced of him. And one thing that could have happened is that there was a clone made from the very time of the birth of these people. And after they died, a spirit came in and continued the life. Now, that's a possibility. When you're talking about NASA, yeah, and of course, here again, there's that German connection with NASA. Oh, yeah, a huge one. And a big connection, too, with the Antarctica narrative. So that's one possibility. And as wild as it seems, that's about as good as an answer as I can think of.
Well, David, it'd be so sly for these nefarious, evil people, because let's just face it, Social Security numbers have not been around for a long time. They really haven't. My great-grandfather had to apply for one later on in his life. I mean, come on now. And then it would be so subtle and sly for the I got to watch what I say for when you have a birth certificate and then they draw blood. They'd be so sly to do some kind of nefarious thing. And it does make you wonder what's going on and what does the Vatican know? Because I know that all things lead back to Rome when it comes to this, and there's a lot of nefarious things out there. And really, the devil's running amok. He's been doing it for a long time. We're not giving him credit here, but we're exposing the deeds of evil here. These things need to be brought to light. And I just, David, for the life of me, I just can't even imagine sitting underneath, if this is a professor or whoever it was teaching me, and I knew that this supposedly passed away in 1986. I could not sit there without questioning it. I could not sit there underneath his teaching and be like, I know you're playing me, man. I know you're playing me. You can't tell me you got a triplet. Do you have a backup? Come on now. And it's not set. So here's another question before we move on. What happened to the one individual that's disappeared? I wonder what happened to him. Did we have some nefarious things? Was there something that coming down the pike, so to speak, that could there have been something tied, like, we talked about at the beginning of this program in 2011? Could the individual that went missing, could he had went somewhere else and everybody else miraculously had twins, but apparently this one, the one that's missing, I think is the one we should really focus on. That's my opinion. I wonder where he's at and wonder whatever he's doing. It kind of has this eerie thing, because if you tie back into Hitler, you can kind of look this stuff up. They're saying that Hitler never, he died later on in life. I know you all have done many programs and talked about that on the Midnight Ride.
Yeah.
Do we have a doppelganger there? Does everybody have a twin? I'm just being a little sarcastic there, but what do you think, David? And how could this happen without, who's supervising? Who's in charge of this nonsense? Like they're fooling the people. And I hate to use this term, it's a magic trick. It's literally sleight of hand. They're using esoteric knowledge against people and causing everybody they're dumbing down the population. How can this happen? And it has happened. And I think it has to do with propaganda. Television is a big trick of the devil, in my opinion, David.
Yeah. And just like the whole moon landing thing, I think that was just phony as can be. We've got, the Challenger. We saw the explosion in the air. Was there people on that? Was there not? We can't really know. Where's that person? Well, we can just speculate. But as we do take scripture, it'll help us to eliminate certain hypotheses. And who is planning that? They're doing this, they're doing that. Who are they? And I like the theory that's been put forth. Stephen Quayle touched on this on Empire Beneath the Ice. Joseph Farrell, in many books, Farrell calls it the Nazi Internationale. And we've talked about this multiple times on Sunday Night Lives and Midnight Rides, where the entire psyop of this alien thing, wanting us to believe it's ET from thousands of light years away, when in reality, this is the continuation of the research the Germans began during World War II and before, the Nazi Bell and the super sophisticated weaponry based on Tesla physics and the ancient texts of the Vedas. I believe that this was continued after the war from bases that were established in Antarctica. I believe that craft that crashed in Roswell took off in 1947 from Antarctica. And of course, the Germans that established bases from the submarines, and you can read a list of the missing Nazi subs and all their capabilities, never caught, never sunk, never accounted for, not just a few, but a lot of them. And Operation Paperclip sent thousands of scientists into Russia and the United States, controlling things at the very highest level. And that's who they are. There are these Germans. From all of these reports, David Pilates picked up on this and of the 411 series. Betty and Barney Hill, one of the earliest UFO documented encounters, they described their Nordic people that approached them with the German accent. And this is who they are. It's the Nazi Internationale, if you will. That is why, and well, we're going to be talking about this on the Midnight Ride, that, oh boy, I don't, it was just like 8 days before John F. Kennedy was killed, he was going to unite with Nikita Khrushchev to combine the United States and Russian uh, programs. And there was a threat there they were afraid of, and no one would have been in a better place to know than Kennedy and Khrushchev of the infiltration and how these paperclip scientists went rogue and formed literally a third government that was threatening to take over everything. But that's kind of my take on it, Brian. I think that's what we're looking at.
So I have a quick question for you, David. There's these David Pilates. He's done a lot of good research on this, missing 401 and all these different cases. So there's always these bodies turning back up, and they'll be either in the location or they'll be in a weird area that makes no sense. A lot of he's picked up on this in his research where they fall from a high place. There won't be nobody around. There won't be no mountain ranges. There won't be nothing for somebody to jump. So here's my theory. It's all speculation. So if there is, based off the young man's account with his grandmother, that it was an android that looked like his grandmother, could it be so easy, David, for this, let's just say, secret space program, for people to be abducted and then they show back up years later or whatever, and it looks like they're decomposing, but they've been gone for 30, 40, 50 years. There has been claims for that in certain different missing 411 cases. Could they been replaced, just literally set down, just an android, like it looks like a doppelganger, a clone, and they actually took the real one? You know what I mean? They actually took the real character, the real person, and just replaced it with an android or a clone, and something just to, so they'll have a way for closure. And I hate to say that, it's just all speculation, it's all theory, but then they'll say, well, this is them, it looks just like them, and then they bury them, and then they go on about their, they mourn the rest of their life because they've had their loved ones, there's a tragic happened. So what do you think, David? Could that be that? I mean, it's highly compelling.
Well, that's a possibility. And the way I would think, trying to be wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, I would think they would probably keep the clone and throw the human back. Now, according to David Jacob, who is one of the leading researchers, and he buys into the alien scenario, and he believes that these people have been developing their art of human hybrids to where they are now able to produce a human hybrid that is, you can't tell it. We had all these things. We've got the insectoids, we've got the reptilians, we've got the little grays, the big grays, and all of these things in a progression to where now these hybrids, they call them, are so human-like that they can literally walk among us. And I think that, and this is rough stuff. This has took them a long time to develop this. And this is according to Mr. Jacobs' research, that they've been working hard to get to the place where they can have a genetic altered human being that can literally fool almost everybody that it's not human and just one of these reproduced bioengineered human beings. And let's face it, this is tough stuff. A lot of times things go wrong. And a lot of these people that are abducted, when the experiment doesn't work and things go south, they think, all right, we'll just chuck you out here in the middle of the woods. And I think that's why we find these people, they're just chucked out, because this is tough stuff. It doesn't always work. And when it doesn't work, they just discard them like a bag of rubbish.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that too. So literally Harvard not too long ago just came out and said, hey, aliens are walking among us. They're claiming that there's underground tunnel systems and there's an advanced alien race that live underneath the earth amongst us, and these things can walk around and take on form like a human, and we should all be in despair and scary. That's basically what it is. They're not saying that, but they're saying that it's called crypto-terrestrial, David. Crypto-terrestrial. We talked about cryptics earlier with Bigfoot and Sasquatch, so they're calling it crypto-terrestrial. Is the hypothesis. They're saying that these things walk among us and they're under the ground and they're on the other side, the dark side of the moon. David, what do you say about this nonsense? Because it's everything that you've talked about in the Midnight Ride and you and John and what we talk about here on FOJC, and they're just now catching up, David. The Harvard scientists have spoken, and there's underground tunnels, and everybody should be running around in scared mode. I mean, literally, they're dripping this nonsense, and it's not good for it's not good for humanity when it comes to men's hearts will fail them looking after the things coming up on the earth. That's the way I feel about this.
Yeah, and it's just all back to this thing of creating a non-biblical scenario for people to believe instead of understanding it scripturally by the word of God. Now, I want to look at a book here a little bit. It's called The Nazi Doctors by Robert J. Lifton. And as Brian mentioned earlier, Mr. Hitler and his favorite doctor, Dr. Joseph Mengele, was obsessed with twins. And at Auschwitz, Joseph Mengele was totally devoted to the study of twins. And it wasn't just one or two, it was hundreds and thousands of twins that were used in experimentation by Dr. Joseph Mengele in Auschwitz. And I'll read just a little bit of it. And this is tough stuff. But on page 350 of this book, it says, in the workroom, and this is a deposition from the people that worked there. It says, in the workroom next to the dissecting room, 14 gypsy twins were waiting about midnight one night, guarded by SS men and crying bitterly. Dr. Mengele didn't say a word to us and prepared a 10 cc and a 5 cc syringe. From a box, he took Evapan, and from another box, he took chloroform, which was in 20 cubic centimeter glass containers, and put these on the operating table. After that, the first twin was brought in, a 14-year-old girl. Dr. Mengele ordered me to undress the girl and put her on the dissecting table. Then he injected the EpiPen into her right arm intravenously. After the child had fallen asleep, he felt for the left ventricle of the heart and injected 10 cc of chloroform. After one little twitch, the child was dead. And this is literally, 14 people a night, 14 twins just murdered, stripped naked, murdered, put on dissecting tables and dissected like we would a frog in biology class. And this just wasn't one or two. It was hundreds and even thousands of twins at Auschwitz that Mengele did this to. And the ones that he didn't kill and dissect, he had other things that he did also. And he would have the twins to have sex with one another and impregnate one another to see if more twins would be born or what. There was sperm from the twins taken to impregnate German ladies. I mean, he had it all going on here, I guarantee you. And according to one theory, it says here on page 359 of this book, in other words, Mengele might have wished to use genetic insights derived from twin research both for breeding desirable leaders and for selecting them from among existing contenders, to be able to create leaders through genetic breeding. And this involved this concept of twinning. Now, this just opens up all kinds of nefarious scenarios. And I think this was the origin. I believe that what Joseph Mengele began at Auschwitz, that it was continued when it was moved. And there's the movie, The Boys of Brazil. And Gregory Peck was in that. It was a movie. It was in the 70s. And it talked about the research that Joseph Mengele continued in Brazil And I believe that also this was continued in South America or in Antarctica, and that these strange things we're seeing. Well, this makes what Willie Joe, the Navajo Indian man, said. Well, there was a clone created of me right from the time of my birth. This is the things that is I believe it's the continuation of what Mengele did at Auschwitz. And I think this could be the root explanation. Well, I mean, the connection between NASA and the German Operation Paperclip is big as all outdoors. And I think here we begin to see a plausible explanation of the origin and perhaps of what we got going on here.
David, was the Willie Joe, was that individual, did he, is there any reports of him being maybe a shaman? Is there any reports of that?
It didn't mention anything like that. It said he was a Navajo Indian in his 40s
Mm-hmm.
and he was a college educated man.
Hmm.
And that's what it said about this man. And he was interviewed by this doctor, Clark, that wrote this book on people that had had experiences like this. And this was, his wasn't the only story. Well, from the time I was born, I had a twin. Didn't have a soul, but, there was a twin. And, according to Mr. Mengele, to create leaders, well, certain people that are used that are a part of selective breeding programs and of these genetic Dr. Frankenstein experiments, well, maybe that they have a clone of these people back for certain reasons, and there are just all kinds of scenarios that you can play out with this. But it's quite possible, let's say, if there was a clone of the United States president, and that all of a sudden the real president of the United States would be gone and that he would be replaced with a clone that would just like him, but not the same person. And this clone to be not human, but totally controlled by its creators for whatever nefarious purposes that they would want to create them.
You're speaking hypothetical, David.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm speaking hypothetically here, or am I? Or am I? You know? Um, you know, there you go. Now, bring up Brian. Anything else you want to say about that before we roll?
Well, it is, we will say hypothetically, if that was a possibility with the a president being cloned in multiple times, there'd be some inconsistencies with the gentleman, and one day the gentleman is speaking very coherently, and the next day he's walking around aimlessly trying to find where he's at, or they'll come on and it looks, you can see the face kind of looks a little different than the other face. It's not always perfect, but there is some weirdness going on in 2024. I'll say that hypothetically, but yeah.
Do we have to ask the question, could a soulless clone love ice cream? Maybe they do. I don't know. But one of the things, and this is another book, David Jacobs, he talks, I think the title of it is They Walk Among Us. We're going to be going into this a little bit on our midnight ride. But he said, and he literally talks about one of the problems they have is getting them to be able to speak and interact with people, and to get them to the point, it's like a program. They put them in an apartment and they get them to where they can interact in society and blend in, and they have a problem speaking and interacting. And this is to where they're at. So just saying, that's what these people are saying, and away we go.
I wonder, David, if it's actual organic dairy or if it's soy, or he has to have the ice cream because of the sugar aspect of it. It might be something more going on there, but we're just kind of a little humor there. But
is it pistachio or is it Rephaim red? We don't really know at this point, do we? All right, then. Bring up the pictures here. Here's another thing. Brian is going to show us some. We're going to go back to Mount Shasta, and we're going to have another little piece of information here we're going to analyze in this area. But pull up and show them the pictures of the sulfur springs there in Mount Shasta and speak to that just a little bit there, Brian, if you will, please.
Well, here's this sulfur springs in Mount Shasta here. It reminds me, I have looked, David, a lot of areas around my local area, and there is sulfur where the Indian culture would talk about on high peak mountains where there's sulfur. When we go back and look, when later on in years past, there was people, saying there was these sulfur cons. There's a lot of elements of sulfur, and I think that's interesting because they would do rituals, etc., and on these high mountains. And it reminds me, Mount Shasta here, some local areas that I've looked into where they have, they say that there's these entities would come through in these certain spots, and they'd have locations, and it would be coordinated with the equinox, the summer equinox, and all these different things. And it kind of makes you wonder, based off the imagery here, there's a sun in the background, but it kind of makes you wonder what's going on here at the Sulphur Springs in Mount Shasta. And is there a, correlation with the sulfur? What is underneath it is my point. What I'm looking at this site is what's underneath it. And like you said at the beginning, Lemuria, if there's any kind of element, or, if we have different things that would create, let's just say sulfur, let's just say limestone, let's say phosphorus, magnesium. What if there is things there that you could actually build stuff, let's just say shuttles, what they talk about in NASA. And this place reminds me similar to Skinwalker Ranch and a lot of other hot zones. But the sulfur, I know this was in the news not too long ago, David. Sulfur smells was all over the place in the last few years. And I thought that was interesting. What do you say about Mount Shasta here? Because I think this site and people missing and the whole sulfur connection reminds me of the sites that I've looked at here in my local area. What do you say about this site, David?
Well, I could do the same thing. I could drive a half hour and I could be at a place where there are hot springs and just a rank smell of sulfur coming up out of the earth. And what does all this mean? Let's get a possible explanation from the book of Enoch. Let's go to the 67th chapter of the book of Enoch, and let's read in verse 5. And I saw that valley in which there was a great convulsion, and a convulsion of the waters. And when all this took place, from that fiery molten metal, and from the convulsion thereof in that place, there was produced a smell of sulfur, and it was connected with those waters, and that valley of the angels who had led astray mankind burned beneath that land. Now, according to the book of Enoch, fallen angels were being punished in the heart of the earth in molten metal that was producing this sulfur smell. Going on, it says, and through its valley, and though its valley proceed, and through its valley proceed streams of fire. And this is the vision that Enoch is seeing in the heart of the earth, where these angels are punished who had led astray those who dwell upon the earth. But those waters shall in those days serve for the kings and the mighty and the exalted, and those who dwell on the earth for the healing of their body. And all of these springs we could show, and we're going to do this in the near future. We're going to do a little mini documentary on a place about a half hour from here that's very fascinating. And always these sulfur springs, there are people and celebrities, they come there for healing. It says, but for the punishment of the spirit, that their bodies are healed, but their spirits are punished. Very interesting. Now their spirit is full of lust, that they may be punished in their body, for they have denied the Lord of spirits, and see their punishment daily, and yet believe not in his name. And in proportion as the burning of their bodies becomes severe, a corresponding change shall take place in their spirit forever and ever, For before the Lord of spirits none shall utter an idle word. For the judgment shall come upon them because they believe in the lust of their body and deny the Spirit of the Lord. And those same waters will undergo a change in the last days. For when those angels are punished in these water springs shall change their temperature. And when these angels ascend, this water of the spring shall change and become cold. And this is the release. When there's going to be a release, when the restrainer is removed, then literally these hot sulfur springs are going to become cool. This is according to the book of Enoch. So, if anyone gives any credibility to the book of Enoch, which I do, that here at Mount Shasta, that in the ancient past, back in the antediluvian world, that a great judgment took place there. And this could actually be one of the places where underneath Mount Shasta, the fallen angels that sinned in the Genesis 6 scenario could be being punished in molten fire that is creating this this smell of sulfur. And indeed, there was the great judgment, and there are many places. There was a lot of these guys, fallen angels, Nephilim, and there's a lot of places where this can be seen. So this could be an explanation of what's going on there. And you see, we've talked a lot about the underworld and the things we see manifesting on the surface of the earth. They're intricately connected with the underworld and the things that are going to go on there. And I just really believe the book of Enoch here, and I think there's some real spiritual insight here that there in Mount Shasta, there was something big going on in the antediluvian world. I believe that this was perhaps ground zero of what we see in Jasher chapter 4 of the creation of these animal hybrids, Bigfoot, if you will, and many other such like creatures was taking place right here. And now the only thing that remains is the big stench when God dropped his judgment, which will soon come again, by the way.
Well, that explains too, like I was saying earlier, with these blood sacrifices that these, these tribes and would do, and it's almost for based on some of the accounts that I read that they was trying to provoke or get these things to manifest and show themselves, right? To pay homage or worship these entities, right? So this sulfur smell, David, I will bring this to you. This is something we need to document here. The alien narrative, a lot of people has claimed that they smell the stench of sulfur, and it smells like a musky sulfur smell when they're getting abducted, or if they see these grays or these entities. And I think the account was I think it's like the 60s. It was the Falcon. I think it was a Falcon Lake incident in Canada, I think. And that was a sulfur smell incident. There's you can go through, and there's all kinds of accounts where people are like, I smell sulfur. So like I said, since 2022, I believe, there's been a high-end smell, even around here. I mean, we smell it. It smells like sulfur everywhere. And even John Pounders, we was talking about this in private conversation, but there's sulfur smells out your all's way. It was just this weird stench everywhere. And it was here's what's really weird. It was mainly at night, David. That's what got me. It was at nighttime. And I don't know how you feel about that, but we might have some interdimensional, let's just say entities run amok and causing a little stir. Maybe that's why the Vatican said, hey, public, watch out for these apparitions and all this nonsense. Don't be alarmed. Here we are. We're the fish god people. You know what I mean? We're from Atlantis here. We're going to tell you some information. Come on. That's a little sarcasm, but David, this sulfur springs here at Mount Shasta and all these applications and from people disappearing from this site, man, oh man. Wow.
And as long as mankind has existed, there's been an association of the smell of sulfur with demonic manifestations. That's just, it goes to the territories, and it's all the same thing. Is it ET? No, it's a devil. And when we just can filter out all the psyop out of this and put it to the test of Scripture, we can see what's going on. And the absolute explosion of the actual seeing of orbs and these creatures, it's off the chart. I talk to every week to several more people that are seeing these things on a regular basis. Um, I just, one person told me this week that they actually watched an orb chase a cat. It's just crazy. But these things are just exploding. People are seeing them all the time, and it's there's an invasion coming. Yes, there is, and we're
So,
seeing the first parts of the invasion.
so speaking to that orb narrative, this is coming out, David. I've seen this on mainstream media. They're calling them Dyson spheres. Dyson, not Dyson vacuum, Dyson spheres. And you would not believe, David, what they're portraying this out to be. There's these so-called experts saying that they know all this knowledge. Would you believe here's what they claim these orbs are. People are claiming they're ancient Atlantean security systems for a so-called planet. And there's these Dyson spheres that was been inundated in our reality as far as they're our protectors. They're not drones. They're the ancient, well, let's just say ancient Lemurian. They were talking about Atlantis earlier, but come on, David. They're talking about the spheres being a technological advancement that's been watching mankind for millenniums. And this is what they're saying. And David, I can't make this up. They are literally saying that those are stations in the sky, and these spheres are like the detectors. These orbs are our protected security system for our Earth. I kid you not, David. Since you mentioned that is literally just some breaking. It's kind of fairly new news in the last few days. So, what's your take on it, David? It makes me laugh, but there you go.
It is. It's crazy, and in all these movies, you always see the clone that's watching you. There's the little clone watching you. So, we know we have watchers. So, there might be a thread of truth behind that lie. When you strip away, when you listen to what they're saying, and well, number one, why are they saying it? They're going to put out misinformation to try to get you to understand there's so much of this going on. They're starting to talk about it. And well, if we're going to talk about it, we're going to point you the wrong way, not the right way to understand it. Of course they will. Of course they will. Now, we want to show y'all something very amazing here. Brian is going to pull up here the petroglyphs. And this just literally means writing upon rocks that is very, very old. And we're going to bring up a petroglyph from this area in Tulane County, California. And I want you to just pull this petroglyph up here from the Mount Shasta area and just speak to that a little bit, Brian. It's really amazing. This is just, it's just off the hook.
So speaking of fallen angels in Genesis 6 and Sasquatch and cryptic creatures, on the right here, on the petroglyph here, it reminds me of what we've been talking about during this program, a Sasquatch, and there's different colors and different, but you have these, I want to point out, David, there's literally 6 men on that, 6 smaller men on the very bottom, and it's like these things got dominion or something. There's some kind of portal situation or scenario, and it almost looks like there's one with a whip, and it's a giant depiction. There's smaller ones and entities here. And one would wonder, it's kind of weird. There's 6, and there's 2 larger, a little bit larger size entities at the top. But to me, David, it looks just like Sasquatch. It looks like a giant. It looks like Genesis 6 narrative written all over this petroglyph. And one would have to really ponder on this, because if you're looking at it, and the stuff that we know now, especially here on FOJC, and what we're all about when it comes to the biblical narrative and the Old Testament, we believe every single word of the Bible.
Amen. Yes, we do.
It has the 6 little small men. So we have we have the 6 imagery. Here we go. It's kind of ironic that it's on this petroglyph. And this goes on. There's a lot of petroglyphs all over our nation that look like spirals. They're depictions of spirals. The Indians are like, look, and they have like javelins and arrows and everything, and they're trying to fight these entities off. But right here, this particular one in California, it looks like it's kind of like, hey, you're on our playground, we're going to take you. It almost looks like this is more of a dominant. There's nothing, the man is not putting a fight up, in my opinion. It looks like, hey, we're watching you, we can take you in a drop of a hat. It looks like
Yeah.
that to me. What do you say, David?
Well, that is exactly what it looks like, and putting everything together, this is another little piece of the Mount Shasta scenario that would very much fit in with the biblical paradigm that we're putting on it here to try to make sense of it spiritually to see what we got going on here. Now, I'm going to go back to Betsy Lewis's book on stargates. I want to read something else. We're going to go back to the Elder Camus. Oh yeah, Sunbow channeling the Elder Camus. Oh boy. Now, this is what old Camus, who is supposedly, and it's a devil, but Camus is speaking through this guy Sunbow, and he says this is what Mr. Sasquatch says. He says, Camus went on to say that our first ancestors were created with those same psychic abilities, but our evolutionary course has largely depleted our gifts as well as our longevity. The book of Genesis says Methuselah lived to be 969 years old. Oh, Camus read the Bible. How about that? This species communicated through telepathy over long distances. That's why those fools who chase us like beasts with guns and infrared glasses will never catch a glimpse of any of us. Our telepathic abilities allow us to foresee who is coming and feel their intentions. So we can hardly ever be surprised by one of yours, except maybe when we are deeply asleep or when one of your fast moving vehicles is coming our way. Now, here's another point of contact with an interesting idea I want to throw out here. And this is from a book by Watchman Nee, The Latent Power of the Soul. And this was banned by Calvary Chapel back in the 80s. So I figured, well, if Calvary Chapel banned it, I need to read it. It can't be all bad. And indeed, it is not all bad. I wouldn't agree with all of Mr. Nee's conclusions here, but it's a very compelling book. And I'll read what he wrote here on The Latent Power of the Soul. On page 19, he says this. In other words, the living soul, which is the result of the coming together of the spirit and the body, possesses unthinkable supernatural power. At the fall, though, the power which distinguishes Adam from us is lost. Yet this does not mean that there is no longer such power. It only denotes that though this ability is still in man, it is nevertheless frozen or immobilized according to Genesis 6. After the fall, man becomes flesh. Now, basically, what Mr. Nee is saying and developing the concept that before Adam fell, he had the ability to use telepathy, and he had a lot of natural ability, the latent power of the soul. What scientists tell us is that we use, I don't know, 10% of our brain, and 90% of our brain is just basically non-functioning. And his idea, and I don't think he had that scientific knowledge then, is that before the fall, instead of operating on 10%, Adam had 100% going on. And this give him the ability to do things naturally that today would be considered psychic abilities. And, here again, I think we have to think that this is at least plausible. And I believe that there is a basis of truth to this concept. Adam was quite the guy before he fell. And I think just common sense in meditating upon this would bring us to this conclusion. And here we see Elder Camus. And Camus says that in the beginning, and here again, we're talking about Adam and Eve, and where we could drop in the whole pre-Adamite scenario here, which is beyond our purview here. But there could definitely have been this pre-Adamite race and Adam himself before the fall that had abilities that today would be looked upon as psychic abilities. And this seems, and see, this is what this devil's talking about. So, when we strip away the alien star child scenario, we can again here to see a grain of truth that's understandable scripturally in what this devil came and was speaking through Mr. Sunbow. Now, let's go back to Betsy Lewis, page 35 in her book, and we're gonna pursue one more statement here. And it says here on page 35, you might think that you still have years to go before being faced with this artificial remodeling. Now, there's a way to put it, Brian. They want to artificially remodel us. And we'll not even go into all the ways they're trying to do that. And I think, our audience is well aware of a laundry list of them. But one of your generations is only a short time for our people, as well as for the lower lords. The situation that your ancestors faced in the downfall of Atlantis is being replayed today, but on a much deeper scale that may cause unrepairable damages to your genetics, evolution, and destiny. And they're basically saying to save your genetics, you need to do what we tell you. If not stopped, and abort the soul evolution cosmic experiment you have been part of with global destruction and mass extinction level event as it happened in the days of Atlantis. And that is going to happen, and it's going to be called the judgment of God upon these people. Extinction level event. Yeah, that's right. Now, I want to look at a book here that was written in 1985. This lady, she actually spent a lot of time up in Vincennes, Indiana, Ruth Montgomery. She and Shirley MacLaine and Ruth Montgomery were like some of the early mothers of the New Age movement. And she wrote this book, a couple here we got, Aliens Among Us and Strangers Among Us. And she was talking about that concept way back in the 80s and even before, about the concept, and she called them walk-ins, that there were walk-ins. She believed right then, and she named several famous people in history that she believed were walk-ins, and that right now she believed in 1985 that famous people and powerful people were actually these walk-ins. They looked just like humans, but they wasn't really human. Now, I want to read something very compelling here. This is on page 189 of her book, Aliens Among Us. And this just really rang a bell. Inhabitants of Maui, that idyllic island in America's Hawaii chain, may not know it, but according to psychic sources, they are living in one of the Earth's most powerful vibratory centers for contacting space beings. And whenever they say space being, just scratch that out and say, we're talking about the Nephilim and the fallen ones. Going on, and hopefully this power source is soon to be harnessed to awaken our higher consciousness. And she talks about ways, the very ways that they're trying to contact this Lemurian civilization that they believe is under Hawaii, just like under Mount Shasta. She says, then with your amplifier and your crystal, you get an amplifier and a crystal, using the black hole and the lenses, you can create a tremendously powerful magnetic power field where people can experience the energies and the amplified universal magnetic field, UMF, created by the contact between your crystal and the crystal of Lemuria on the ocean floor. All right. So they believe that there's an ancient Lemurian crystal on the ocean floor, and if you get your rig and everything and get your vibrations going, that you can actually contact these entities. And where's the best place on earth to do it? Maui, according to Miss Montgomery. Well, Brian, in light of what we've seen in Maui, the strange going on with the blue roofs, the fires, missing people. We got missing people in Maui. What do we got going on here, Brian?
Well, I know this, David. There's been reports, speaking of missing people, I think it was like 2,000 something children missing. And I think the local natives was livid. And see, here's another thing. When that happened, they was boxing off, literally just walling off areas, and people couldn't go back to them. And there was some weird stuff going on. There was reports of like ships that had no logos on it that was off the coast, that there was people with military gear that looked more advanced, and it was all black ops, secret something something government, and no logos, and Caucasian, white Caucasian, just, your, I guess, GI Joe kind of organization, if you want to kind of relate to a cartoon or a movie, comic books, etc. But they had all that going on, and they're still having suppression. Those people can't. There's a lot of talk that they've been able to rebuild. There's all these celebrities and these tech companies that have invested in land. There's places that had the blue roofs, that the celebrities and the high status people had blue roofs, and their mansion stayed. They didn't get hit by the direct energy weaponry, and one would have to ponder. And I remember, David, there was a account not too long ago about a CIA. I think it was a CIA operative. I think it was a deathbed confession or something to that level, and referred to Alaska. So we have Alaska. I think there was like 16,000 people missing from Alaska, and there's supposed to be a pyramid underneath there. For all from what I've researched, a pyramid underneath the ground.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, David. There's a correlation that they say Maui. I've heard the account in Hawaii that you can have there's a stargate that is literally government controlled, and I wonder if it's in Maui. And you can, according to the gentleman that was telling this account, you could literally spontaneously just walk through this water-like vapor, and once you walk through, you instantaneously be in Alaska. It wasn't 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It wasn't no time dilation. It was instant, just like sending a text message. And so what would happen? How could 2,000 something kids, and they was all just miraculously vanished, and then all the government suppression, the warnings didn't go off. They had this supposedly secure warnings for any kind of a natural disaster that didn't go off correctly. There was streets being shut down. People couldn't they had to jump into the ocean because the heat got so intense.
Yeah.
So you'd have to say there's either something in the sky shooting down something and causing carnage and destruction, and causing the frames of cars to melt to the asphalt. And mind you, there was houses that didn't have blue roofs, and there are trees and bushes, and nothing was on fire, nothing imploding. And that makes you think of an account that happened back in, I'm going to say it's September 2001. And then so we have this concept here. Is there a stargate that directly goes to Alaska and goes to Hawaii? What do you think, David? And if there is, that could explain where they could have just miraculously lost all these people, and could they be in Alaska? Who knows? And I know David Pilates talks about Alaska. He knows a lot about Alaska. He talks about that. There's some comparisons. There's missing people. Come on, Dave. What do you think?
Well, and the same author, Betsy Lewis, has written an entire book just about these Alaska phenomenon. And what we have here, they're on the west, in the western part of the United States, in the Northwest. We have Alaska, we have Mount Shasta, and we have Maui. That all three are high candidates for stargates. Like I say, going all the way back to little Indiana boy who's named Indiana. Your stargate takes you go through a portal, you're here, you go through a portal, and you go into another realm where spirits can dwell. You're here, then you're there. That little boy said, well, this looked like grandma was a robot. I was here, and I went to a cave, and they wanted me to poo on a little plate there. And that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. A stargate, or the biblical word would be portal or gate, where you can go from one place to another. Just you're there, and that's what we're talking about. And this is a very compelling explanation for what we see going on here. And what we would have Alaska, we would have Maui, and we could have Mount Shasta, all, and this, we talk about Atlantis in the Atlantic, and this is the ancient, uh, the same thing over here of Lemuria, the third continent, the third race of the Blavatsky uh, theology. And all of these would be contacting, and you like say, if we still have, we've talked a lot about the line of Cain in the heart of the earth, the Nephilim in the heart of the earth, and all they're doing to continue the bioengineering of the human genome to actually being placed. And theoretically, these kids could be taken to, you know, do know who knows what with them. And, you know, in lieu of a better explanation with all of the supernatural phenomenon going on, I believe that these ideas and concepts that we put forth on the FOJC Radio Sunday Night Live are very compelling. We're going to do something here on FOJC Radio Sunday Night Live. We're going to do the Sunday Night Slam. And on the count of three, we're going to do the Sunday Night Slam. And I want you to hit the like button only if you liked it, but you know you liked it. So let's do the slam on three. Hit that like button. 1, 2, 3. Slam. There we go. Let's put those likes into orbit. Get those algorithms a popping. That's right. Well, we want to thank each and every one of you. And all of these, all that we do is to provoke people to not look to the ancient aliens or Billy Carson, but to look to the Word of God for understanding these things that are going on around us. And let's face it, these things are going on around us. Ignoring them isn't going to help a bit, but finding biblical answers is going to turn men and women back to the Word of God, which will always make the most sense. And there we will find our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and salvation. Jesus died for you. And if you will repent and believe the gospel and accept the death of Christ upon the cross as payment for your sin debt, you can have eternal life. Turn to Jesus, the real one, with all of your heart before it's too late. And Brian, with that, do you have any final words for our broadcast this evening?
David, it's an honor always to do this program with you. And Sunday Night Live, Underground Church, like Brother David said, hit that like button, hit that share button, subscribe. Anybody that's new out there that's just stumbled upon us here on the YouTube world, welcome to the Underground Church. We really appreciate you all being here. And just help us out and share this thing out. And Mount Shasta, David, Mount Shasta here, Stargates. Man, this is one to really ponder on for future reference. And this is one I won't forget. But yeah, thank you, David, for allowing me to be on here. And let's end us out, David, here on this FOJC Underground Church. End us out, David.
Well, thank you, Brian. And I can't say enough about how much we appreciate you and all you do. And all of you that are the listeners of FOJC Radio, thank you so much. We couldn't do what we do without your prayers and your support. So with that, until the next broadcast on FOJC Radio, which and they just keep popping, we're going to say high five and good night from FOJC Radio Sunday Night Live. We'll see you again soon.